Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello.
Okay, but
Are you talking, Mike? Steve?
oh, I don't need a mic.
All right.
Good morning. Hi, thanks for coming here. I think we're in our third year of township talks, and each one has great turnout. And we wanted to make sure that this year, mission focused on things that were really related to both Westtown and American, of course. And this one is external example. Our newest member of the historical commission, I'm on the historical. Is Fred Magner, who was going to come in costume, changed his mind, but it comes
I like
that. But he is a physician, he's an expert on functional medicine, and I'm sure all of you are excited as I am to hear more about functional medicine in our district. So welcome, Fred.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll try out these slides and see if they work. Which one? Which? Delay. Okay. The the American Revolution started out, and the greatest physician at the time was George Washington, believe it or not. And the reason for that was a whole series of things happened in his life that ultimately led for him to become commander-in-chief of the army. And the first thing that George Washington did is he went to Congress when he became commander-in-chief, and he said, Congress, I want a good medical department. Congress said, okay, but do not follow the British guidelines because we don't like the British. So we had to start from the scratch on making the whole challenge. And so what happened was that we drew upon the local hospital, which was Pennsylvania Hospital, first hospital in the United States, and it was 1752. Also the best hospital in the United States to this day. And now Boston claims they were the first hospital. Don't believe them. Okay. So these are various areas of hospitals that were set up by Washington, and it was catch as catch can. They would use churches, people's homes, whatever, and they had the physicians follow behind the elements of the attacks. The problem is that they were so fast in moving that sometimes we didn't know where they were going next and where to take the patients next. And so we would put them with local people in their homes. And there was a great belief in this area of care because Pennsylvania Hospital had as its symbol the Good Samaritan. And because the Good Samaritan was someone who helped somebody irregardless of their background. Many people from German background, pacifist Quakers, were ultimately helped in the care of these individuals at the own risk of their own lives many times, because they had smallpox, yellow fever, cholera, a number of different diseases. And so that's how we started out. Okay, 25,000 servicemen perished in this struggle. That's amazing, isn't it? 25,000. And this is a typical physician's medical box. And this is Dr. Shippen's. The Shippen family was very prominent in Philadelphia. In fact, one of the ladies was Peggy Shippen in that family, who married a rascal named, very good, Benedict Arnold. And so I feel sorry for Benedict Arnold because he was shot in the femur, which is a bone right here, okay, in the Battle of Saratoga. And normally physicians, when you get a shot like that and it hits the femur, it paralyzes the whole area. Everything shatters, the bone shatters, there's no way to debride that. So we always say amputate. He refused amputation. So the rest of his life, he limped around with all these particles in his muscles, blood vessels from the shattered bone, and was in great pain. So he, from the get-go, he wasn't thinking right. And to marry a teenage girl like the shipping girls, anyhow, 6,800 in battle and 8,500 British prisoners and 10,000 camps or hospitals. Just an amazing amount. We called all the physicians from Pennsylvania Hospital, put them in the Army, and that was the result. Okay, mortality rate was at 9%. Okay, this was pretty good for a war. This was considered good. To this day, 0.9% mortality rate is acceptable. Civil War, look at that, 1.6. That was really brutal. The weapons became more sophisticated, and the replacement of the weapons, but more accurate ones that reached 300 yards rather than 50 yards, made it that war very brutal. So 200,000 men were under arms at various times. We have three armies, We have regular army, we have Army Reserves to this day, and then we have National Guard. So we have three different things that we can pull from depending on what our needs are. And a mortality rate of Americans at 12.5 was a figure that was very high, and Union forces in the Civil War was 13%. Sickness rate was also very high. Okay, this is the administration of the hospital was very important, and to direct efficiency. And this shows you Charles McKnight's surgical instrument that he has in the case. I brought some surgical instruments to show you here, and there's a big long knife on one of them you can see. This is when the amputation is not going well. Okay, thank you, Tom. It's not going well, and the patient is struggling because they had no anesthesia, none at all. And so we would give them a gill, which is a little glass or a copper, almost a quarter of a pint of rum. And then we would give them a bullet to put between the teeth. And we would say, bite the bullet. You've heard that expression. And then we would start sawing away. It was important to saw so that you get a nice end on the bone so that you can take and wrap the skin around it, sew it up. And if the patient, that's for the hips, the one that Tom's had there. And the problem was that if a patient would struggle and you couldn't do it, you'd use that first cleaver-like instrument and just whop it off at that time. So it was quite a procedure. So the medical department was not geared for large-scale warfare, especially on a yearly basis. And it was not until 1779 that we got some stability in the War Department with medicine. Prior to that, we had a number of physicians that were appointed to be the chief surgeons, and they would fight with each other like cats and dogs. If you know doctors, we're like cats. We go in all different directions. Hard to herd. So, and if you ever been in, a medical meeting and, everybody's going this way and that way, it's quite interesting. So Congress could not decide until late 1780 whether they want to have a powerful director. And they kept on splitting off authorities, which made administration of the hospitals very difficult. Congress, in fact, was indifferent to hospital conditions. And the medical committee, at least, and the congressional committees seldom were represented. The department was subject to politics. high appointments, endless disputes, and chronic shortages. It got to the point that General Washington would personally interview the physicians, and if he found them acceptable to be used in the army, then he would make out his own little diploma saying, yes, you can practice in the army. I had one of those for myself, that we still do this. So your question on your understanding of anatomy, pharmacology, and sanitation. Yellow Springs, you've heard of Yellow Springs? That was our only general hospital. If you were to go to Yellow Springs today, you'll see nothing. They have knocked down the hospital, unfortunately, but it was quite a beautiful hospital, 2 stories, and it was in a good location. So mostly they converted civilian hospitals, and typical of the European armies would do that. They would take over a house or something. Evacuation procedures were gruesome and shocking. And we didn't have ambulances. Ambulances didn't come out until French Revolution. Napoleon had ambulances. Although later on, we copied from him in Pennsylvania, had downtown ambulances, but they never transported. The best way you could take a patient and transport them in the colonial times was in a wheelbarrow. And let me show you the next one here. We had the same sort of medicine that the advanced European nations had. However, we didn't learn a lot from when the French came. French had a very different way of practicing from most of the other European countries. And they counseled us. They said, hey, you're going for a water source, don't use the wells, because the enemy could have thrown a lot of things in those wells. Use the springs, the spring houses. Then you have a better chance of getting decent water. They also introduced the concept that we still use now with the seals and so on, is to put a silver coin, a real silver coin, in the water because it breaks down bacteria. So it makes it safe. Now they use colloidal silver, but a simple silver coin would do just as well. So if you have any questions as I go along here, just shout out. Okay, major discoveries, the sanitation codes. We finally figured out it's not a good idea to have your water source near the privy. Okay, the French knew that, but we had a little while to finally figure that out. Then we collected data on pestilence, very important, how many people had this or that disease and so on. And diphtheria and was frequently misdiagnosed. So we go through the records and we can tell a lot about the practicing physicians. Practical education in treating smallpox, typhus, dysentery, malaria, and numerous other ailments we taught. Now, a good supporter of us was General Washington, because when General Washington was very young, his father died. He was 11 years old, and he was taken under the wing of his half-brother named Lawrence. Okay, and if you ever heard of the War of Jenkins' Ear, what happened in Jenkins' Ear is that this privateer for the British wanted to go in the Caribbean because the Spanish controlled the Caribbean and just get all kinds of good stuff. So he went to the king and he said, I would like to be a privateer. And the king said, good, do that, go down there. So he went down there, and unfortunately he was caught by a Spanish admiral. Spanish admiral ties him up to a mast of his own ship, cuts his ear off. And he says, you tell your king, this is what I'm going to do to him. I'm going to cut his ear off. Now here, take that ear. And they put it in a big bottle of brine. And they said, now you go back there and you tell him. Well, he did. Every time Parliament recessed and they were in a taverns, who shows up but Jenkins with his ear in brine? He does this for 8 years. Every time. Walpole, who was the prime minister, said, look, stop. If you come here again, we'll take your other ear off. So he finally stopped. But then the parliament says, we really should do something about that. The Spanish are getting too cocky. They're getting all the good stuff. Let's put together a group to go down there and teach them a lesson. They said, and we don't want to be recognized as being British. So what can we do? Well, we'll get these colonists. We'll have them do it for us. They'll do our dirty work. And there's a guy who's in charge of the militia in Virginia, Lawrence Washington. Get him to do it. Yeah, that's a great idea. So they get Lawrence, and he gets a group of Marines, and they go to Cartagena. You know where Cartagena is? Part of Colombia. It wasn't part of Colombia back then. And they go in there because that's where all the gold and good stuff. And they have big fights and so on. A lot of Marines are lost. And Lawrence comes back with tuberculosis. Okay. So back then, if you had tuberculosis, the theory was you go to health spas or different places up in the mountains or at the seashore or so on, and it makes you feel better and you live longer. Okay. So Lawrence comes back. And he says to George, George, come with me. I need to go to a health spa. And we know people who are related to us. His wife's family in Fairfax related to in the Barbados. Come with me to the Barbados. So he says, okay. So this is the first time George leaves the country, goes down there, and they have a dinner party. They all sit around and they said, oh, you're wonderful people. You're Virginian aristocracy. They weren't. They would like to be. But so they said, we're going to have a big dinner party. And I hope you don't mind it. One of the guests has smallpox. Well, they didn't know. They didn't know. They said, oh, all right, yeah, invite them. So they came. And sure enough, George got smallpox. And in his diary, for 14 weeks, he could not write a word. And every day he wrote in his diary, he was just completely knocked out. Fortunately, he was very young and tall and strong, and he finally beat it. And he still had a pocked face. You don't see much of that on the statues, but it was not really markedly pocked, but it was pocked. And it also, intact. Smallpox always attacks your mouth first, and that's called convolucence. And that's just the reason why he lost his teeth. And the teeth that he didn't lose, because it was so painful, he would pull out himself. He actually pulled one out in Trap, and they still have it in Trap, Pennsylvania, if you go out there and see it. So, and so he comes back, and he's very sympathetic for the health of people, and especially soldiers with smallpox. So now they break apart. Lawrence says, I'm going to go to one of these health spas in the Atlantic. There's got to be one. I'm going to Bermuda next. George says, no, I'm going back home, because he was living with his half brother in a house called Mount Vernon. You heard of that? It was named after the commander of Lawrence's units that went down to Colombia. So he comes back here, and a series of things happen, and all of a sudden, Lawrence shows up. Lawrence says, I've gone every place. I'm not getting any better. And he dies. Followed by his wife, Anne, gets tuberculosis from Lawrence, and she dies. The only one left standing to inherit everything is George. So George gets this property, which is good because George's mother said, hey, I'm not moving out of here. I'm staying on my plantation. and you're not getting it. This was good for him. So he took over that. And then Virginia said, well, Lawrence used to be in charge of the militia. Now, George, you're in charge. And so he was put in charge. And then the French and Indian War started. And so the whole collection of experiences. So that's why in every Congress, he would wear the uniform that he wore in the French and Indian War to remind everybody, hey, I got military experience. If you guys are going to break away, choose me. So that was the situation. So, but he was very mindful of what was happening. So when they had Lexington and Concord, you heard of that? Okay. In Lexington and Concord, they were going to pick Dr. Warren as chief of all, not only the hospital, a whole command of the Army. Dr. Warren runs up at Bunker Hill, and he's not even have a commission yet. He's fighting with the troops. He gets shot. He gets shot right up here. Okay. Now, if you get shot in that area, you do not make Latin speeches after that. You are dead. So if you read about, he did this profound thing and said things in Latin or whatever, that's instant death. You just go straight through here, bang. And the caliber was 54, so it had to be a British officer's gun. Pistol was used to that. So he dies, so they need another commander. They say, George, come up here. George comes up, and what happens? The first thing he experiences in Marblehead, which is 18 miles north of Boston, if you know that area, an outbreak of smallpox. He says, whoa, I got the deal on this because I watched how they treated them in Barbados, right? So he goes to Marblehead and he said, how did you get this? They said, well, we take our ships out and there's a big Atlantic shelf out there. All the fish are very active and so on. And we were fishing and we take our boats and other countries' boats tie up and we trade back and forth. And I got this giant loaf of Castile soap. And I said, my wife would really like this. So he brings it back to Marblehead. The captain's wife likes it. She cuts it up, gives it to all the other captains' wives. It's all full of smallpox. So everybody breaks out of smallpox in Marblehead. George just happens to be there. He just became commander. He goes up there and he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take an island. We're going to make it a quarantine station. We're going to have we'll do this, we'll do that, and we'll keep everybody 6 feet apart. You ever heard that? Yeah, this is where it comes from. Now, NIH won't agree to that. They'll say, oh, we don't know. We don't just, no, that's where it came from. And the whole inoculation procedure he watched in Barbados, he now adopts for our Army. And that is a very simple procedure. If somebody has smallpox, the fresh vestule that occurs, you jab a quill pen in it, and then you take somebody that doesn't have smallpox and you scratch their arm with it. That's called inoculation. Okay. This is before vaccination. Remember, Jenna, with vaccination? It comes from the Latin vacca, which means cow. No cows involved in this. Okay. So everybody loves what Washington does. Harvard University cancels graduation and they all go to get vaccinated by General Washington. They love this. And it does save the Army. Okay. Now, Congress is like, well, I don't know if we should do that or not. They were, hot and cold about this. It got to the point that soldiers would inoculate themselves, learning the procedure. They would come in, they'd mask the person that was going to be inoculated. So he couldn't say later on, John did that, because he don't know who it was. And so they would inoculate themselves if Congress has a spell where they don't approve it. So there was a lot of this going on. And this is an idea, it just shows you how the site looks like, whether it's vaccination or inoculation and the difference between them. Okay. Next slide. Okay, let me take that back for a second. All right. Okay, no novel techniques were done. Now, Pennsylvania Hospital was unique. Yes, ma'am.
What is the difference? Vaccination versus.
Okay, when cows get cowpox, okay, we noticed that the ladies who milked the cows never got smallpox because it spread to them and they were automatically protected by that. And so what we did in this area is that down out in Reading, we would take cows and we'd say, okay, cows, all right, when you have an outbreak of that, let us know and we'll use that, okay, to, to do the vaccination. Now, the problem is, this is the beginning of pharmaceutical companies. Because that farm now is a pharmaceutical company. So you had to make sure that you were actually getting the live, clean sera from the cow. Unfortunately, like a lot of pharmaceutical companies back then, of course they don't do that now, they would cut corners. And in fact, one of the doctors writes to the farm and says, all the patients I gave vaccination to died. What happened? The farm writes back, to tell you the truth, we didn't use the cows. We found a tramp in the barn who had smallpox. And we took the lesions from him. Well, it was filthy, dirty sera, and they were using that. So I just shocked that they would even admit it, but they did. They used a tramp instead. And so we cut them out of the process. But that's what would happen. You have to be careful of what your sources are for it. So there was a great variety of operations done. We even at Pennsylvania Hospital, we learned how to do a tonsillectomy with a thing that looks like the boom, like guillotine you would put in your throat, patient's throat. That didn't last too long, but first first operation of shoulder, 1781, and down towards the end of the war, we did less amputation. We kept on, that trick horse wore out after a while. So, and it took us 40 minutes to amputate. So you can imagine soaring away for 40 minutes, how painful. We got it better down to 20 minutes with the Civil War, but it was still not a happy situation. So really no wound surgery advances. Dr. Gilman accidentally discovered the disinfectant properties of alcohol. And how did he discover this? He put his hand up during the battle and got shot through the hand, found a dirty rum rag and wrapped it around that, and he didn't get an infection. He said, boy, there's something in this, and they teased it out. And we done? Good. Oh. Let me see. Can you put it back to life? Good. All right. All right, look, that's good looking group here. Yeah. Okay. Now, for Pennsylvania Hospital, all our physicians, we treat everybody. It could be Hessians, it could be British, it could be Indians. And our policy was everybody to be treated. And vaccinations, we advertised in the papers at this time, was absolutely free, gratis. And anybody that came in, we had a special heart for Navy, because the Navy, Continental Navy, or any kind of Navy, doesn't have the physicians on the ships, and they used to come in really ragged. with common sources of scurvy, yes.
I read that there were some soldiers that objected to getting the smallpox. What did Washington do in those? What was the policy in those situations?
Okay, what he did was he called the people that objected together and he said, let me show you vaccination, okay? And they did that. And they also said, you know, you can do inoculation because this is what I did to my wife. In front of the whole army, he did it to his own wife, Martha. Okay. So, yeah, he was a strong believer in this because he went through it himself, you know? And, you know, the mortality rate from smallpox was unbelievably bad. And yellow fever was hitting the same time, and especially in Philadelphia. And if you read the statistics on the mortality of yellow fever and also of smallpox, they have, well, it was 10% of the people died. No, 10% didn't die. Only the 10% that they're figuring on, all the upper class boogied out of Philadelphia when the outbreak was. And so the only people that could not leave were the poor, and they died 40%. So we had set up 2 hospitals to treat. Dr. Gerard, you know what Gerard College is? He had his French physicians come in there, and they did some amazing work. And we were doing work, and we would compare back and forth the different types of work. They discovered at Gerard Hospital that if you have a disease, it's very important to have nursing care. You know, because nurses prior to this weren't elevated. So we started a nursing school at Pennsylvania Hospital, and because they would constantly keep the patients clean and fed them, made sure they ate so they wouldn't die. Now we have, you ever heard of Gray's Ferry? Okay, Gray's Ferry, Gray owned a farm right over here in Thornbury, and he had 6 daughters. So after the Battle of the Brandywine, they came over to the farm, all the wounded soldiers, we took them over there. These girls were so good at amputations and so quick with the needle and sewing and everything that the British, to this day, if you go to a hospital in England, they call their nurses Gray's ladies. So they were very, very efficient. So we started a formal school of nursing at Pennsylvania Hospital. Again, the first. And we started obstetrics. Now, how did obstetrics start? Well, everybody who was personal guard around Washington, their wives were dying in childbirth. We couldn't figure out why. And so all the first troop, you've heard of first troop? Those are the ones that guarded Washington. They took 8 years of their pay, pulled it all together, gave it to Pennsylvania Hospital, and they said, start a clinic to treat this and get a handle on this. And we did. And that's when we had a fellow come in named Lister. And Lister said, you guys doing all these operations, you got to wash your hands. And wash our hands, come on, we're doctors. You know, so there was a lot of resentment. I said, nope, that's the rules. And so, and your instruments, they have to be put in. Well, what do you think? Listerine? Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So it got to be a process. And also we encourage them to use gloves. And you'll see a lot of photographs. I have tons of photographs of the physicians, even into the 18th century, not wearing gloves, not wearing hats, not wearing masks. But they got Benjamin Rush's statue up on the operating room wall to give them extra credit or guidance or something like that. So that's always been a problem. Once you start an operation, you cannot stop. And so we always emphasize this to people, have everything set up. And for students, what we teach medical students is you have to see one before you do one. You can't read it in a journal and realized that you can do that because we would always get in trouble with that. The first time we used ether as an anesthetic was just prior to the Civil War. And the physician was so scared, he thought he killed the patient by giving him ether. And he didn't realize the state. And he said, get this stuff out. And that set back for 25 years the use of ether. It was used in the South before we were able to use it here because of that. So it's very important that you actually see something. You just can't read it in a good medical journal or something like that and assume that you can do it now. So, any other questions? Yes.
I would like to know a bit more about the physicians. Where were their training? How was it?
Yeah. Yeah, it was all over the place. And the best medical schools were in Scotland, Edinburgh. Okay. And so our top doctors came from here. The problem was that at that medical school, there was no end to it. Was it 4 years? Is it 6 years? Oh, you would never know. So after a while, physicians say, that's enough. That's not, and they would just leave. But that was one of the drawbacks to doing it. Others were apprentice, the sons of would learn from their parents. You had a German school, Otto, his group was they actually ran Yellow Springs. And they never got any of the diseases, but a lot of the early, like Dr. Hutchison, who was in charge of the WAFs, and he said, there's something to do with these mosquitoes. Oh, there's something with with yellow fever and mosquitoes, well, it killed them. So we never put all the pieces together at that time, but they had some good guesses, good empirical guesses. So I don't want to belittle it. Well, yes.
Were the medical schools hands-on training, or were there textbooks involved too in the procedure?
Yes, they're very good textbooks. We still use some of the surgical textbooks. We had a fellow named Dr. Bond. Every time you get a broken leg, it's a Bond splint. And he made all kinds of fabulous splints. And he was so good that we put in legislation to name in front of the hospital at 8th and Spruce, change the name to Bond Street because of that. It's still in the process. It's in City Hall. I haven't got to that paperwork yet. But the whole land that Pennsylvania Hospital is on was given by William Penn. And the people in Philadelphia said, no, we don't want a hospital there. It's too far out of the city. 8th and Spruce. Yes, they said. So they made a petition. And so when Penn went back, he was supposed to take the petition to the king. Somehow it got lost. So we built the hospital. And of course, the cutting edge thing for Pennsylvania Hospital is also psychiatry. And so we had a very psychiatric area, which is very, very important. Because prior to Pennsylvania Hospital, when somebody had mental problems, you chain them to the wall and you make fun of them. And we said, there's got to be a better way. And so they are the leaders in that area to this day. Now, some of the basic things that we discovered, such as scurvy. Okay, people have forgotten the importance of vitamin C. Your mothers would say to you, drink orange juice every morning. We got away from that. No, I'm going to have a Pop-Tart, This is a guarantee you're getting enough vitamin C. If you don't get enough vitamin C, also when you get older, you'll have a lot of problems. It is so central to your body. Very, very important. And as you get older, your dermis doesn't stick up like this. It goes like this. It lays down flat. And you lay along a wrong way for a long time, you get wounds of secondary intention. Secondary intention means it's hard to heal. So you got to do all kinds of smoke and mirrors to try to heal that thing, where if you just had an adequate amount of vitamin C in your body, it would prevent that. So we have to go back to basics with a lot of things that we're doing now. And we've got, we're trying to clean up the the additives that they put in, a lot of, especially flour. The, the cancer rate from some flours is so high. And the reason is because they use potassium bromide, okay? Now, in pharmacy school, I used to always remember this, they would say, bromate she ate, bromide she died. That's how critical it is. So they would use bromate for seizures that they couldn't control. We've gotten away from that now. And, but the food industry loves to take potassium bromate and put it in the flour. Why? Well, it's easier for the bakers to work with. So you can make pizza pies, okay? A lot of the good flours like that you get at Trader Joe's doesn't have it in it. A lot of the organics have stopped that. But people that have like bakeries that do a lot of flour work or pizza pies, they still like that because it's easier for them to work with. It just has, it just has this drawback. It's not natural. So you have to get back a lot of times to some of the natural recommendations. And that's hard as pulling teeth because they used to use it. They would dust the little Ritz crackers with it so that the boxes wouldn't get, funky and you couldn't eat it. But, so we're trying to get that out of the system. And so instead of doing that, they put on the bottom now on certain boxes, well, it's another non-organic agent is added to it. And that's not good enough, So we need to start to, get back to the original. Vitamin C, very, very important. All the gold miners, they went out there, they would eat beef and drink whiskey, and then they all died of scurvy because they didn't take vitamin C. You have to replace that every day. And the sailors, in the British Navy discovered that with limes and so on accidentally, but it still holds true today. Any other questions? We running over?
Good.
All right, okay. I know you got questions, huh? Yes,
And I'm thinking about infection. This previously, I told you during the Civil War, we learned that most of the men died. The soldiers died of infection.
they all, yeah, same thing in the, yes.
Really, really outrageous.
Yes, a very high statistical rate. And, the infections would rage, would break out like in Philadelphia and out here in West Town, because they had students from Philadelphia. They were worried because the students would go back and forth to visit their parents. Were they bringing it back and so forth? And so they put measures to make sure that they didn't. They insisted on, hygienic procedures. You go up to Lancaster at the time, that was the frontier. They would butcher animals and just throw them in the road. You had to step around all this debris and so on. And those were great areas for infection and so on. And then throw it in the water source. And we still have a problem with water. We have to make sure that our water sources, we're getting to the point where the old piping in most of the area is starting to need, replacement. And so we have to make sure that we don't have a lot of accidental spills like you heard on the Potomac and so on going on. So once it gets in there, it becomes a real problem. Yes. Any other questions? Gotta let them go?
Well,
Yes.
I see your next slide is about pharmacy.
Yes, the pharmacy, well,
Tell us about the whole prescription.
yeah, see, these are different compounds in large scale production that was used back then. And there was a pharmacy originally started up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. We would make our own pharmaceutical products. They were not really great stuff, but then they moved it to Lidditz Pharmacopoeia. He wrote an actual book, which is pretty good. But the treatments were rough. For instance, Washington's mother had breast cancer, and they were treating her with mercury and arsenic. What's that going to do? All right. She was in pain all the time. It did not relieve the pain. They claimed that was for pain relief. And the cancer was so pronounced that it was coming out of her breast and so on. So when George went to see her and get her blessings before he became president of the United States, she dressed up fully, she got out of the bed and so on, and received him. And after that, she quickly went down. But then he felt bad, and he knew that he'd probably never see her again. But this reappears in the Civil War. In the Civil War practices, they said, yeah, let's use mercury. Let's use arsenic again, like in the old times. And the Surgeon General said, no, that's out of date. Because they were in the Civil War, they were in the South, and Grant wanted to be successful. He overruled the Surgeon General and he said, okay, docs, you can use them to the detriment of these people. The politics involved here was, okay, keep those doctors happy, especially those ones from the South that are helping us and working with us, and they really believe in arsenic and mercury. And he overruled the surgeon. This is one of the things that happens a lot of times in medicine. You get political overlay on it, and so on. So now, we have the Carlisle pharmacy was the original pharmacy. They would send it out. And you have another one sneaking in here? Let's see. Okay. Those are closed. King's College, we got that. This is the one that's gonna haunt me here, huh? These products are not good. Now, we did use Epsom salts. And we still use Epsom salts. That's a valid thing to use. That was one of the things. And of course, we used different things for pain that we still use the bark of willow trees, as used for malaria. We still do not have an inoculation or a vaccination or anything to treat malaria. So it's one of these things you have to avoid. And that's one of the downfalls was our friends when they went to Yorktown that they gave up. He had a wagon load of 200 wagons in a row with malaria soldiers because the British were down south and they didn't realize the problems in the swamps and so on with malaria. And so they were really handicapped. Lucky we didn't get as much, but that was the, and the whole idea in malaria is that the red blood cells will curl up and it's supposed to protect the native populations that exposed to it. And that's how we get problems with that. We have a physician here. Do you want to say anything? Well, no. Yes.
Just another question about the pharmaceuticals. Is how consistent back in those days would these compounds be when somebody was producing them?
Yeah.
Somebody presumably said, well, here's how you have to make it. So
Yeah.
that's number one. Number two is the average colonial person, we live out there, we're a farmer in West. A lot of the stuff is happening in cities, areas. How likely would a colonial living in a rural area like this be able to take advantage of medicine?
Yeah. The Quakers back then would write cookbooks. In the back of those cookbooks, which are very good, would be all the recommendations, because Dr. Mom was out here and she was treating. And many of the recommendations are really valid in those. So they did not rely on city medicine, and they lived a healthier life because they weren't all compacted. The biggest spreader of diseases was taverns. Because everybody had to stop at a tavern when they traveled. Horses can only go 15 miles. Then they quit, you have to change horses. So every 15 miles, there would be a tavern. And if you constantly travel, then you get, like anything else, like in an airport, you get exposed to other people from all over, and this is how it spreads. The other thing that's a mistake is that people think with tavern pipes, you see the tavern pipes, you dig them up and you see they're all broken off on the end. And they said, oh, well, what happened is you would smoke it, then you'd break it off and give it to the next person. He would smoke it, and then he'd break it off, give it to the next. No, no germs here. Nothing about germs. So what happened was that everybody would share the same pipe. Okay, and tobacco was a big thing for everybody, men and women. And when it got gunky from too much phlegm and so on, you had a little cage. You put the pipe in the cage, you put it in the fireplace, and you cook the gunk out. And you reuse it. Yeah. And these are even clay pipes that we do that. I have a whole collection of those if you want to see those. And then in the 1850s, they smartened up a little bit. They just made the ends of clay. It could be red clay, it could be white clay. You heard of Clay Creek in Delaware? That's where they would get the clay from. And then they would stick a stem. People would carry their own stem, a wooden stem, could be wood or a reed, and they would smoke that way. So that at least prevented, the exposure that you normally get. But that was the big harbor, is the taverns. And Lancaster, 40 taverns in the whole town before they even had a courthouse. They had a lot of problems. Fortunately, this area, everybody was very prudent on, how they kept, because of the kept clean and so forth, that they were concerned, but they had their ear to what was going on in Philadelphia, and they wanted to protect themselves against, getting contamination, especially from the students. Fortunately, there was no contamination here from, especially with some of the respiratory problems. You got another one? Yes.
Yeah, nice question. Didn't General Washington die as a result of bloodletting?
Yes. Here's the thing. You heard of Ben Franklin, right? Right. Brilliant guy. He takes a frog's foot and he had a microscope. We didn't have microscopes, doctors. That was for the Dutch do that stuff, with a microscope, and look at the little bugs. So he put a frog's foot underneath there, and he's looking at this circulation of blood in the foot. And he says, whoa, there's circulation. Harvey's right, circulation. Well, let's figure out from this mathematically how much blood a human has in. Bad math. We thought there was 12 quarts of blood in your body. No, 6 quarts. 6 quarts, okay? So Washington becomes ill after going running around in a wet outfit, comes in, and Martha said, well, you should change your clothes. I want to receive these guests. He catches cold, okay? He goes to his gardener and he says to the gardener, bleed me, okay? And the gardener starts to bleed him, right? Okay, he says, get my doctors, get Benjamin Rush down here, get all my buddies. They come down and everybody's bleeding. Okay, they bled 9 quarts of blood out of him. Okay, what's the chances he's gonna live? Okay, they all stand around and they say, we could do a trach. So he would breathe better, tracheotomy. He could breathe, that was practice back then. And they said, well, you want to do it? No, I don't want to do it. You want to do it? This guy's former president of the United States. I'm not going to do it. So none of them, they said, well, just let him, take care and so on. And you know, he'll bounce back. He didn't bounce back, he died. So technically, physicians bled him to death. That's a prime example of overdoing it. In the military, it was different bleeding than civilian. In civilian practice, normally you would bleed somebody. Anybody want to volunteer? I can show you how. So you would do it is put the hand back like here, put the knife through here, pull the fleam, and Tom has one back there. Let me show you. It looks like a Boy Scout knife. All right, that's a fleam. No, that's a no. It's
Good assistant.
it's like a, no, it looks like a Boy Scout knife with all the different blades. It's brass. There you go, right there, see, and you can, how deep you want it to cut is all, you know, you would decide and so on. And for civilians, what we would do is after we bleed them, we have a bowl under here, and then we would keep track of how much we bled, okay? They said you had an idea of how much you take out of somebody. Military didn't do that, had no time to do that. Bled them, whatever came out, and then hopefully, you know, that would help. So that was the procedure. And so, you know, military medicine is like military music. Okay, it doesn't have the fine you know, overtures that you would see normally. So what main thing we do in military medicine is we teach the corpsmen is to clear the airway first thing. Okay. And you see an accident sign, you come on an accident sign, you want to make sure to clear that airway. When I see children in their houses, like from 0 to 3, all through the Delaware County and Philadelphia County, I used to do this for 15 years. And invariably, one of the children will choke in there. Most of them choke on that little plastic thing that you see on the breads. You know, it's like a rectangle. Okay. When it goes down, you don't know it's there. And even on X-ray, it's hard to find. Okay. So the best thing you can do if you have a check, you know, you have a grandchild you're with or something like that, is sweep the mouth. Make sure there's nothing in there, because even that clear plastic on the juice things, that comes off, the child puts it in their mouth. Children at that age communicate through their mouth. They feel things, they put it in their mouth all the time. That's a way of expanding their environment. The problem is there's so many things in the area. So I always tell children when I'm teaching you about military medicine, if you find those little tabs, give them to mom. Don't leave them on the floor. Don't let them fall on the floor. Because the baby will pick it up and put it in their mouth, and you have a big problem. And so we've been pretty successful. The other thing that was a big problem in military medicine, and it's a big problem now in civilian medicine, is brain injuries. Unfortunately, we live in a state that does not require helmets for motorcycles. You know, and so we call motorcycle people organ donors. That's how bad it is. They don't wear helmets. And so I say to the kids, if your dad wants to take you on a motorcycle ride, make sure you have a helmet on. You know, he gives you a helmet, right? Because he doesn't want to wear one, you have a better chance of surviving that. Very problematic. The other thing that's problematic is skateboards. They have these skateboard parks, and the kids do not wear helmets. None of them. I wish I had $1 for every time I've stopped and said, you need a helmet. So you see the pros in that field always wear a helmet that do all that skateboarding stuff. That's a big problem. Now, we had a child over here on Creek Road. You know, Creek Road runs along the Brady line. And he said, you know, there's no traffic. I'm going to go on my bike and I'm going to go down the road. I don't have to worry about falling. You know, it's very quiet. And so he's going down the road. The other side of the road is a dead deer. Okay, just laying there, got hit by a car or something. But he's bicycling close. Up in the tree, turkey bus. sees him going for the deer. He thinks that Johnny's gonna eat my deer, take my food, attacks the boy, knocks him off the bike. He rolls down into the riverbank and he has concussion as well as, bruises head to toe. So he had to open his skull to relieve the pressure, okay? The problem with this is, even though we saved the piece to put back, they're not the same. Once you get exposure of oxygen to your brain, many, many times you have to relearn a lot of things. Just not the same. It's very dangerous. So it's very important for children, any kind of bicycle, even if it's in a cul-de-sac, that they wear a helmet. The helmets are made to break. That's why they break when somebody falls. And the football, you see it now, of course, and we've refined those. But in polo, any kind of horseback riding, it's very important to wear a helmet. Save yourself a lot of agony otherwise. So.
Colonial medicine, they use leeches in the army.
No.
What about?
You know why they didn't use it? They didn't use leeches because they were a pain in the neck to carry. Yeah. They don't translate it well. They would use it in civilian medicine out here, and some of our famous physicians would use that as a bloodletting way. And what was the other thing?
How about letting maggots clean out?
Oh, maggots, yeah, that was a good way of cleaning out the wound. But you gotta, make sure that you stop it. Another thing is, if you have a wound and you don't have anything to cover it, back then they would use honey. They put honey on there because there's no oxygen in honey, and that would at least temporarily get you to the point where you could have it bound again. So that made sense for that. And nowadays, we also, when we give the SEALs, Navy SEALs go out and they have compasses with them, and they get stuck in the country someplace, and they have to go on survival mode. They can break open their compasses, and inside the compass is mineral oil. Now you can take mineral oil and you can put it in your ears, and then the bugs don't go in your ears when you sleep. So it's a good way of, and so we learned that from the colonial times. Give the French credit for that one. Yes.
That gardening a few minutes ago, and I wondered about herb gardens in colonial times. Is there a lot of stock put in, when
Lot of
not in like wartime?
Yeah, if you go to Pennsylvania Hospital on 8th and Spruce, there's a medicinal herb garden still there. And the Pepper family is always potentiated. The problem with herbs is us, as a physician, we like to know, here's a compound, this amount, we give it, this is the result, okay? With herbs, there's so many alkaloids in there, we don't know what's effective. You heard of Senecode? You heard of that? Makes you go to the bathroom, doesn't it? That's an herb. Now, if we take that herb and we take it apart, there's 5 parts to it. So it works when it's an herb. It doesn't work if we just take 4. We don't know why. So we try to keep the compounds, selective like that. A lot of drugs we've copied from herbs and the treatment of herbs, so on like that. You see, and in cancer treatment, we copy some of the herbs that we use in treating cancer. So, there's nothing new under the sun, we just have to relearn. And, inflammatory is very big now. And there's some very nutritional modalities you can use to reduce inflammation. And I have a whole lecture on that. Just simple changes in your diet reduce the inflammation. Well, who gets inflammation? Everybody who's on dialysis. You take all the blood out of somebody's body, you put it in a machine, and then you put it back in their body. They're inflamed all the time. And the only way is that you have to have them come down and sit down and say, now, eat this, eat that, don't eat this, don't eat that, watch your potassium, and it's a grueling experience. So, but the more and more people know about making the right choices, as you get older, you cannot eat and drink like it used to be when you're a teenager. Okay. You have to modify your diet and you want to concentrate on healthy things to eat. Make the right choices. The little choices that are healthy make a world of difference. And sometimes we could talk about that in the future, like, but thank you. All right.
For excellent discussion. I wanted to point out that your doctor has brought with him not only the display of instruments, which are really worth going over and taking a look at, he also printed off a lot of handouts that you can take home with you because there's a lot more information in that as well. And I would like to the doctor giving us another presentation in the future. So thank you for coming out and have a great evening.
Thank you.